Alright, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Alright, so today's topic is about software testing. Um, I'm Oshin Bailey, co-founder of Jamaican Developers Group, and I'll basically spearheading this majority of this presentation, then followed by Jordan Jones with Cypress. The objectives, as mentioned before earlier, Jamaican developers is gearing towards, strengthening development skills of Jamaicans and showcasing like basically the local talents we have in Jamaica, as well as helping developers to be exposed to certain technology, certain environment and companies. Because as we know, there's a lot of quality developers in Jamaica, and it's a matter of just connecting them and finding the right opportunities for developers to shine and to grow in not just a developer mindset, but in a business mindset and solution based. Because a part of being a developer is not just to build software, code something, but to provide value to either ourselves, a company, or society on a whole. So Jamaican developers geared towards strengthening all of these development skills, communities, and so forth. We have a centralized hub for like everything news related, tech related regarding jobs, news, events, training, and we also have a Slack and a forum where we actually discuss and talk about tech topics and development strategies in Jamaica. All right, the agenda, as mentioned before, is all about software testing. To be precise, visual testing, why testing is important. We'll go into a bit of visual testing versus an end-to-end testing. And the tools that we look at is like Robot Framework and Cypress. A quick disclaimer, it's not necessarily a verse off or, in a previous event, I actually said that in this event, Jordan and I are going to settle an argument or score which is better, Cypress or WordPress, Cypress or Robot. Um, uh, yes, I would like to think yes, it's a verse off to see which one is better, which one offer more feature, value, and so forth. But at the end of the day, technology is basically supposed to make our life easier. So in retrospect, it's what makes your life easier, or how simple it is, how easy you is able to use, and how functional it is in any given environment. So later on we'll talk about those two tools, and afterwards we'll ask about any lightning talk. How do you use, if you use any testing tool, and if you notice how do you use Git, ignore that. This is actually a template that I copy and totally forgot to change my last event from Git to software testing, and afterwards we're just going to wrap up. Alright, so what's software testing? Okay, so software testing is basically a process of investigating or evaluating our software solution to find any bug, defect, or anything that not working as how it's supposed to. Because one of the things is that with in the software development lifecycle, of course, you have some form of requirements gathering or scope of the project. And one of the things is that the software should be built against the requirements or basically customer needs and value. So if the software does not work as how it's intended, it can be either a defect or a bug. Bug tends to be more of if there's something wrong with the code that is breaking some form of change, or it's not working properly. It tends to be a bug, while defect tends to go towards well, it's not working as expected to, but it's actually outputting something, but not necessarily what's expected. All right, so in the software development life cycle, majority of us use use the agile methodology. Software testing is a key component in it, and especially it happens just before deployment. So of course, it starts off with the planning stage, gathering the requirements and so forth. You might design the system, doing mock-ups, understanding like the key components and the resources that the software will eventually need, and basically draft up, okay, how is this going to be developed and all of the resources. Then you go in the development stage, followed by after development is testing. But in truth and fact, testing should be be a part of the planning stage, because you have different scope whereby you have test-driven development, where you write the test first before you actually start development, and that is basically understanding the software, the problem it's trying to solve, and the different components that will be in place. And then once you go into development, you already know what to expect. You develop, and when develop whichever feature, like for example, straight away 2 plus 2 equal 4. So 2 plus 2 is equal 4. So you know that when you do an addition, it always equals something. So you don't need to develop a function for that. Straight away you can just write a unit test to say, okay, this will most likely be the output of any given input, and when it goes into the developer and to develop that feature, it will then just run against that test and then validate that the functionality works. And it saves a lot of problems when it comes on to after deployment, and ensure that the software works as it's supposed to. And then it goes into the review process and continue along an iterative manner in the software development lifecycle. Well, this is more agile, but yeah, about that. So with hardware, we typically manual test hardware to see if it's working. Like in this case, we're testing like the output of something, and we realize that it's 5 volts. There's not necessarily automated approach to test hardware, but there is means. But for us developers, we think about software and software mainly. So software can be tested both automatically and manually. And generally, the best approach to test a software is not just randomly go out and say, okay, let me just find bug. We actually go design, okay, based on the requirement, we create a test plan, and that test plan basically has, okay, these are the requirements, these are the features, this is how it's supposed to work, and based on that, we write up a test design, which basically goes through the workflow of the for example, a sequence diagram, or the operation of function works and so forth, and then model that. Basically design the test flow and functionality of the test from that sequence diagram, or whichever functionality of the software you're testing. After that, you go into the test execution phase, which is basically running the test, and afterwards exit. Based on the criteria that matches, whether it's pass, fail, or sometimes you see a pause state or a bolted state in a test execution, and you see that later on. And afterwards, you get a test report. And of course, the test report will show you how much tests ran, how much tests failed, how much tests passed. It will give you data. Some testing tool will give you data, what was tested, the type of data was tested, and what occurred during those different test cases. For example, if there was an exception shown, you see that in the test report that this is the reason why it breaks. But with visual testing, which will mostly focus on this, you see something like a timeout or anything related to web or a UI component. All right, so importance of testing. Of course, lack of testing, and there's a actual statement. You know, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. Testing is like that. As without testing, you never know whether something is truly working or whether there's bugs or defects in the system. And then, as shown in the previous slide, there's a test report, and you notice there's an iteration where we move from the test report and then go back to the test plan, go to the test design. Defect or bug can become regressive, and hence the regression testing, whereby it reoccur because it wasn't tested and nothing was done about it. So it's an existing bug that keep on being in the system after each iteration. So when that goes out in the public and someone notices, it just creates a catastrophe where the system might break down, the infrastructure might break down. For example, NASA back in the 1900, there was a miscalculation by I think it was 0.2, and that sent off the lunar, one of the lunar trips, basically a little inch off from landing on the moon. And that's based on, miscalculation, sure, but lack of testing, insufficient testing. And we in Jamaica have seen, it happened recently with some banks in Jamaica where the UI of the website of the caused a lot of problem. In fact, one of their core business solution was down for like a week or so. And a lot of businesses switched from using their bank and switched to other banks because of the problems that they faced. And of course they did recover, but the big question was, why wasn't this fully tested? Was there an alpha beta testing period? Was there like a blue-green deployment where they can deploy this change and then roll back? Visually, did they get feedback from users to know whether users would like these changes and whether these buttons or mobile application feature are working? So it's really important to test your software, not just from internal point of view, but also get customer feedback, because at the end of the day, the customers are the end users. They're the individuals that you're trying to gain some form of income, add value to their life, and they're literally just their revenue stream. So without valid users to validate your software and continue your software, then a software just will be a software without any users. So it's very important to test software solutions. And there's of course an internal joke where developers should not test their own software, because it is said that we build the software so we tend to know what to look for. But sadly, end users don't work like that. Once you give it to an end user, they will do all sort of stuff unexpectedly, and it might reveal problems that the developer didn't see. And of course, what about the quality team? Of course, they will test, they report to the developers. The developer would fix these tests, and it goes into an iterative process until majority of the problems, defects are resolved. But sadly, not everything basically get catched by the quality team, because in a certain sense, internally, it's just like on average, a company size in Jamaica is tend to be less than 50 to 100, and that's a small amount of people comparing to over 2 million individuals within Jamaica. So, and of course, it's over in of course in the world. So it's there's no straight line in using a software. As developers, we would love to build a straight line, but there's always someone or some end users that tend to not to go on that straight line. So to get those customer feedback as soon as possible is great, even though at times the quality testers would basically capture some of those unexpected issues and report it back to the developers to fix. And of course, when certain stuff don't get captured and it go towards the project managers to test, and of course the CEO and companies and so forth, they get this error and they're like, they can't work with this, and goes in back in this iterative process. And if a bug basically leak through all of these individuals, then it gets to the user and just cause a big explosion. Like the bank that, well, didn't mention the bank, but a particular bank in Jamaica. And this is something we never want to happen, not as a company, not as a developer, not as anyone at all. Because the true value of software solution, as mentioned, is to add value and make it easy for someone to utilize what we build to make their life somewhat easier. For example, that particular bank which I actually used, they actually came out with the mobile app, and I actually like the mobile app, despite their failures of the past. But it's, I guess, in a certain sense, it's a part of the business process. Well, business life, but it's something that we should as much mitigate as possible, and that's where testing comes in. Alright, so there are two types of testing that we're going to talk about: visual testing and end-to-end testing. There's quite a lot of different testing that paradigm that we could have talked about, like unit testing, integration testing, system testing, and then the different phase in testing. But today focus was mainly on the visual testing and end-to-end testing, robot and versus Cypress. So with visual testing, as you probably guess, visual, it's a matter of looking at a software, seeing if it works as it's supposed to as an end user. The button works, the text display nice, it's very accessible, and the whole entire user journey is easy to follow and go through. Of course, visual testing, we all done visual testing at some point, even if we don't think it some form of visual testing. We've given feedback at some point to a developer, to a company, or feedback to our customer care that, oh, this was easy, it was terrible, or something of the sort. But sadly, at times that testing process tend to be manual and iterative. Each time there's a change, we have to iterate and retest it and so forth. And that's where automated testing come in, where you can put these use tools to automate the testing process that a human being would do, and mimic the entire behavior journey and so forth, and put it in a CICD, continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, to say that each time the software change, it's tested by the automated tool, and then it will show whether the different test cases are still working, what is breaking, and what we need to actually update and change. And of course, on the other side, there's end-to-end testing, which is basically a user journey, testing the start point to the end point of a user journey. There's also end-to-end testing for data. How does data flow from the start of when a user, you start using the system to the end of that user story? How does the data get manipulated? Where does the data go? Which objects are utilizing those data, and so forth? So visual testing and end-to-end testing actually work hand in hand. Most tools that are meant for end-to-end testing can be used for visual testing and vice versa. The first one we'll get into is robot framework. In the next video, we'll talk about robot framework and how it can be used for visual testing and end-to-end testing. So if you're interested, click on the link in the description and you should see part 2. Thank you.